Chapter 6, A Simple Theory. Tommy and I were finally becoming comfortable. The extent of our personal knowledge of one another's insights made us closer and closer with each interval of easy interrogation. Though our connection, and the trust fabricated from it, had been emboldened, the sessions had met an inflection point. The new meeting came, and I was ravished by a looming necessity. The moment where Tommy would expel the filthy truth. I could feel it coming. His scars, with all their permanence and severity, needed opening. Rotten, the flesh of Tommy's heart was dying, growing only in the infestation of bilious bacteria. Unspeakable quantities sometimes rolling up into speech. His end was nearing, the fever growing more inescapable through each application of temporary bandage. He had built it all on the putrescence of his truth. There was a darkness dwelling inside of him, spreading as the infestation fed on his goodness. This process unencumbered by moral quandary. He was to die or to live. He needed to decide. With that grotesque metaphor empowering my worried conscience, I probed, is there a moment that you can pinpoint in which you felt the most out of control? He thanked me for my forthrightness and quieted himself for a minute or three. Then, at the most unpredictable moment, he spoke. Does talking about my truth really bring about healing? He desperately pleaded. Are the tools of self-structuring that you have been trained to distribute not worthy in isolation? Could the rendering of a more distinguished, honorable, and moral man be possible in the absence of context? Surely, by analyzing the symptomologies of a sick soul and treating them, the subduing of the sorrowful spirit is secondary. The importance lies with the enabling of a righteous future. Dwelling in the past, though it may give you more context of my suffering, only allows for a greater pool of working knowledge on the synthesis of the symptomologies. There seems to be no therapeutic impropriety in sharing only the non-anecdotal thoughts bouncing throughout my mind. It seems to be much less productive for me to dwell on the past, which would then open more interpretations than stars in our galaxy. Now accosting him, I retorted, a major importance of sharing the past with me is in the trust that it necessitates. You are an insular young man with few connections to people. This isolation has been caused only by you, intolerant of the mere potentiality of trusting in another person. Your trust in me only comes at the expense of risking your invulnerability. Taking the risk that I may know something that could hurt you, it terrifies you. This terror is only an association you have made. For a young man who prides himself on objectivity, it worries me that the desideratum of trust, as a crucial part of a meaningful life, has been totally skipped in the mapping and everyday practices of your life. This cannot be anyone's way forward. I think I know what has happened in your beautiful mind. As is true with most thoughtful people, you are highly sensitive to your surroundings, barraged by the full onslaught of misdoings and injustices of regular people. The hypersensitive uptake of objective reality has cornered you into a place where interactions with the world must be in your control, within the comfort of confinement. This methodology, with safety paramount, is the key ingredient in the recipe for lonely desolation. This is why I am so insistent on the formation of trust between you and me. Only once you have broken your mold will you be able to grow and branch out in truth and prosperity. You must have faith in me. You must let me in. You must trust me. Once I had released my reasoning for trying to invoke truthful memory, the reason for my wholehearted questioning became clearer to him. I must have been clamoring with anticipation because his demeanor changed instantly after my recognition of his realization. Perhaps I will indulge you, he calmly stated. Just give me some time to think about it all. I rejoiced for him, adding, uncovering the insidious past is a feat that most never undergo. Remember that purposeful excursion dismantles trauma, while accidental unearthing and fleeting escapism grows the beast into an unquestionably destructive force. Especially with the intelligence Tommy had been granted, the prospect of never peeling back the layers of damage had been a viable option. That was before he met me. I promptly shared with him a warning my prefunerary father had written. Many of the smartest people leave themselves toiling in the past for their entire lives, I said softly, never reaching peace with the totality of their human experience. Each person is a sum of past, present, and future actions, thoughts, and feelings. To have faith enough to heal your past is to shine light upon your future. Nodding in agreement, Tommy looked at me with an admittance on his face. Your life has meaning because you deem it so, I added. It is faith that is necessitated by this meaning. It is the bridge that binds the gap between your past and current self with a worthy future self. Without faith, self-worth and meaning is a closed loop. Faith carries the tired and worrisome child of potentiality from the hope for better into reality. This underlying faith is crucial. This underlying faith is fundamental. This faith is everything. This is the real danger of eliminating religious belief. It seems so liberating upon shallow examination, but it takes away so much more than predictable. Aside from the more direct problems caused by the removal of any form of a forgiving yet vengeful God, the issues associated with the absence of at least a solid Numen seem to blur into obscure trivialities. Through intense analysis, the arcane usefulness that rests atop the shoulders of religiosity is damaging only when removed. It is the system of faith, indirectly inculcated by religious training, that is such a crucial component of human fulfillment. To teach a man to have faith is like giving him a map to his destiny, allowing him to cut through the Delphic dystopia between what is and what could be. Like the scaffolding to the bridges of one's life, faith is the most central structure to support the journey. He paused for a few moments and then added a summation that conglomerated all the complexity of our thoughtfulness with a polished conciseness, burst pronouncing, I can only become a man of meaning if I have faith that I can be. That truth, fervently breached into existence, ambushed me with emotion. He was right. The less religious prospects of his generation had led young, ambitious men like him into the depths of despair. The missed refinement of a singular vision for the future abandoned them in an unsteady space, their venture becoming random and futile. Like an ant scrambling to escape the conic confinement of the antlion's trap, with the sand collapsing beneath its furious feet and the malicious mandibles of the vicious predator patiently awaiting its next meal, doom was imminent. Tommy knew exactly where he was going wrong. His continuously contemplated tenuous tasting and outspitting of life needed to find its end. I wondered what was gluing him to that place. In continuation of his avoidance of my recollective questioning, Tommy brought up another issue. Will I be remembered? He asked. Am I even worthy of this body, this soon-to-be corpse? I am what I do in this life. The importance of these actions, and the memories that are created by the audience, are only deemed relevant because of the value placed on the audience's life. These people's lives are also noteworthy in the actions undertaken by them, and the memories associated with those. This process is not inherently substantial. It is the ever-rolling history and future of man. I am a cog in the wheel, another experience to add to what? Nothing, it is the same as something. Our very meaning seems to be an Ouroboros of interconnected meanings, a house of reliant cards of one another's many others. Talk about circular reasoning, circular meaning. I could tell his dismissive ingenuity was dwindling. I watched on as he explained again and again why he was a stagnant entity. He was tirelessly trying to convince me that he was stuck within the indifferent silence of the universe and that his entrapment was not a direct result of his failure of accountability or studious resolve, or so he wanted to show me. The more he spoke, the more I understood that there was a disjunction between him and his portrayal of himself. That facade, filled with fake integrity and inaccurate, was only slightly translucent. The clarification of its translucence was a process of continual and simple attentive focus on the message with which Tommy was choking himself. The intellectualizations and idyllic visions with which he pretended to cleanse himself clogged the very vasculature that was attempting to revivify his holiness. Like an awkward non sequitur, all his speeches and announcements, his masterful presentations of art and music, and forced poetic compositions, reeked of insincerity. I couldn't help but take a moment and plead with him to be genuine. He still hadn't realized the girthy path that lay ahead of us. To outline the network of trust and vulnerability necessary to expose his problems and the most decisive action to take aim at his array of aggravations and irritations, I devised a plan. Annoyed by the absurd longevity of Tommy's falseness, I prefaced my question with a limitation. He was to only use one sentence to respond to my questioning. With my rules set, I asked, what is it exactly that you see within me that is untrustworthy? Is it simply because I am the archetypal enemy of man, man himself? Is it perhaps because I am the one man to whom you have been exposed that can see through your excuses? What is it, Tommy? One sentence, he answered feverishly. Okay, here it is. You don't need me yet. I immediately understood his response and loathed his concise rendition of what I had theorized years before our meetings. Tommy had stumbled upon it and summarized it with such effrontery ease. I had worked so tirelessly on the refinement of my original theory, titled transactional theory. And now here it was, in popped and pierced form, back in my face from the mouth of this insolent boyman Tommy. The theory explored the intricate systems and structures built by people. It broke the complexity into a series of interactions or transactions. The transactions all lead back to the original user of time and space. Transactional theory showed people for who they were, deeply self-serving but careful individuals. The relationships, acts of kindness, and moralities explored in the theory were not damaged by the theory, but instead were clarified. I had felt that the theory fully achieved its goal of explaining the simplicity of people while maintaining a pragmatic and positive path forward. The main answering of my theorizing was the integration of all kinds of transactional people into a mutually beneficial mental interreal communal system. There now with Tommy, I found myself awakening from to my ideas as incomplete, Tommy's still tapping top toe almost audible beneath his soft shoe. I scrambled around my bookcase for a minute until I found a copy of a psychological essay I had written and published. Though the spiteful temptation to dismiss Tommy's transcendent intelligence resided boldly within me, I celebrated his synthesis and connected it to my work. I read my paper's summary to Tommy. Each person, I stated excitedly and tricententiciously, from their inception, seeks survival and impact. Each person is born with only themselves in mind. From their mother, they are bonded. The bond, immediately formed, is not derived from the loving and compassionate analysis of character and aspirations. Connection and love enter not. Rather, the emotionality emerges from the internally regulatory homeostatic system. The link between life-giving supplementation and the mother is instantly fulfilled, and thus the first ever real transaction takes place. This is our ultimate and untouched form, totally self-important, neither good nor evil, but completely self-important. From here, we form relationships transactionally, with each person giving and receiving, constantly being morphed and molded through continuous involvement. Further play bonds and familial transactions are played out, and secondary relationships are formed. Continuing this processing, we move onto the transactional formation of tertiary relationships. This stage of transactional interaction is one of the largest parts of life. It is through socialization, or the accumulation of transactional experiences, folded into a maximally efficacious mediating action abstraction regulation self-service give or take system, that the child is so-called defined. Within these tertiary transactions are where people reside for most of their lives. Here, the formulation of character, morality, and societal structuring is the key outcome. Like an evolution simulation running through countless possibilities and refining the most potent outcome, the result of all interactions leads to the formation of the most effective contributor to a system. These refined individuations multiply out and build the most principled society. This step is where the societal impact of totalitarianism, or any remarkable hindrance to the freedom of transactions, leads to undernourished psychologies. The transactions that make up our lives define us. Though always self-serving, the emphasis on morality, a fair and honest mediation setup, or the ultimate tertiary transactional modulator, allows for the net outcome of all interactions to be positive. Morality arises from the most egalitarian mediating modality of administered, consistent, and fair interactions. The system is thus equi-endogenously emboldened. The unwritten but understood morality that has arisen in all societies, before religion or cohesive spiritual awareness, is where humanist truly resides. The freedom of transaction, and the resulting conflict or resolution, has refined morality into an understandable concept. Through understanding this process, we can accept that morality is something that arises as a direct result of freedom. Perhaps this chronology is why freedom has been the overwhelming favorite fighting ethic throughout all human history. There is the propensity for good and evil residing in everyone, existing on a spectrum. The unleashing of either pole is always only a few interactions away. The goal of the most utopian future is to allow for the ubiquitous selfishness of the numerous transactional entities, people, to be purely transferred through an overarching system that holds freedom as the chief axiom of success. This freedom will allow for the evolution, and eventually, the proximal embodiment of a merit-filled human distribution, approximating perfect morality. As we move temporally through life, our desires become no less self-serving, but our transactional constraints increase. First, we are given an all-caring mother with whom we immediately bond. No surprise there. Then we are thrusted upon a father who shows us conditional love and defines our interactions with the world through a system, hopefully a meritocracy. Non-technically next, we move on to siblings who reinforce the social importance of transactional endeavoring, sharing a common set of familial boundaries and rules, familial morality. Friends come along and show that familial and brotherly love can be aroused by any fair transactional relation. A romantic relationship will follow, and a new form of love will emerge, morphing the transactional constraints completely. Finally, the new two lovers will have children and the process will begin once more. The children, extensions of the parents, are cared for passionately. Thus, the parents will serve themselves secondarily in the obvious sense of the word. Not actually though, for their vested interests and motivations make it so that they serve themselves as proxy others. From all these relationships and their retained lessons, a rough value system is synthesized. The level of narcissism of any self-entity in this processing of life has not decreased, but rather has transformed through a consistent and predictable value system that mediates the transactions and increases in its restrictions through calls to service. This transactional understanding wipes all moral grandiosity out from beneath us. No longer may we judge another for their unique but equivalently separate self-service. No longer can we hate at all. Each of us is no less self-serving than the next. We must command our judgment to be objective and understand that interactions are simple transactions mediated by a value system. This out to in to out to in to out and on stabilizing system is individualized and communal, and eventually, at the human-humanity scale, internalized and obvious, felt, as is said, they say. Now this is in truth what accounts for a person's solidarity, definitions, commitment, and functional ideals. Together with the ocean traits, transactional theory aids in navigating the complexities of life. Further, it synthesizes a known and predictable basis for interactions. Simultaneously, there is no longer a call to condemnation as our decisions all arise from a base of self-service. If the underlying origination of all actions is self-service, one action may be hated and another loved, but the judgment of a person's humanity, their intrinsic moral value or fiber, remains unjustified. Most human actions in life have been philosophically defined as good or bad outside of our interactions, but we may now transcend this dichotomy by accepting that most suffering is found within dealing with the repercussions of refusal to accept ourselves as who we are. Our high-order labels, such as good and evil, awarded by ourselves, restrict us into false distinctions faux above, so below, truth. When we break away from a modulating system, our labels crumble, our weak psyche too. Another note on functionality. The tragedy of the commons plays a large role in the deconstruction of a communal modulation system. When we intertwine value systems, usually resultant and defined from by the mixed integration of disparate IQs, social stations, economic stations, political standings, ethnic makeups, racial makeups, or most efficaciously troublesome combinations of such things, we find ourselves at the mercy of battling values. Each contributor to the compound value system can no longer rely on a consistent or endocrinologically unchallenging transactional modulator. This unknown, the largest fear of any mammal, necessitates self-defined transactional modulation. Thus, the return to unmodulated selfishness ensues. This self-defined decision-making spreads quickly and its perversion dismantles all consistency and faith in one another, exponentially collapsing all metastructures. Perhaps this is the reason for the success of socialism in homogenized nations and the need for free-market merit representative systems in heterogeneous ones. Tommy agreed wholeheartedly and added, I like your use of high-order labels. These personas that we pretend to be driven by, they truly are laughable. Also, the tragedy of the commons really is important here. Why would I tell truth if I have no measurable metric indicating to my self-serving mind that you would do the same? Hence, the transaction doesn't work. He readjusted himself in his seat. Wow, so we should really pity those who sin, as they have either been crushed so ingloriously that they find no virtue in fair transactions, or they are so overwhelmingly unmediated in their self-service that a genuine relationship is impossible. The same thing at different bidivergent levels of truth. I suppose these sentiments are. Very nice distinction between people and their actions. I really like it. After he finished ingratiating me, I realized that he had manipulated me into avoiding the indictment of his pain-ridden past. Crafty as it was, I sharply acknowledged his cunning plan. My musing has allowed you once more to evade your truth, said sternly. It's time, Tommy. Before we could continue exploring the limits of Tommy's openness, he added, a little close to Freud. No? I looked at him with indescribable discontentment, flipped furiously through the paper, and stopped on the section labeled Warranted Objections, and quickly read my first admittance. While Freud's ideas on psychosexual stages, I scoffed tirade tantrumed, rather flustered, and his overall analysis of human development also focuses on the categorization of specific psychological malformations, transactional theory is not closely associated with self-service in the sexual drive and fulfillment processes as a full-scope theorization, but rather as a partial truth, subsidiary to transactional theory. Additionally, within transactional theory, the impetus of all actions as being self-serving is analyzed in a more practical manner. While the selfish desires described by transactional theory and by Freud coincide, the more pragmatic understanding of all behaviors, malformed or healthy, resides within this theorization. With transactional theory in practice, there is no necessitated psychoanalytic process to analyze the actions and drives of humanity. Rather, through the simple understanding and acceptance of everyone's inherent self-service, all interactions may become clear. This transparency gifts all who can accept it with the advantage of educated and strategic analysis of all people and their actions. I shifted from reading the theory to my summation, personalized for Tommy, washing the theory clean of its scientific sterility. I added, by accepting the lingering human limitation that separates us from transcendence self-service driven by physiological separation, we can strip away all humanly defined divine morality and understand it as is ought to be understood, as a mediating system. We all want things, but must work within a moral framework to receive them. Morality, uncorrupted, often mistaken for intrinsic goodness, is the system that allocates desired outcomes to those who work within its confines. Do not ask why a man is moral, but rather question why he holds his morality as paramount. Here you may see his true revelry. I also theorize why high intelligence is correlated with sociopathy. Intelligence allows for the circumventing of morality by the sociopath through manipulation of the mediating system. No moral or value systems, if the underlying divinity is not accepted, are able to correct for forceful falseness followed by the actual success by a form of genius. Lying and duplicitous dealings are inherently unstable over the long term though, and thus eradicated outside of the morality by the weight of hard repeat reality. No matter how practical this theory is, rationalization will never replace the acceptance of the transcendental truth on which all of life relies. Value of life is the substrate upon which morality grows. Tommy agreed for the most part and we finished the meeting. As we said our goodbyes, and I touched his hand, the most gruesome vision flashed before my eyes. It was an instant, some unrecordable moment in neural space, untouched by reality. Realistic reverence and horror attacked me. The image was a snake-like man, towering over me, tail wrapped around my body, powerfully squeezing the life from me. Each of my exhales allowed for the tightening of its grip. Accompanying the grave imagery was the most piercing feeling of isolation. Nothing was coming to save me. After some time spent dwelling within my synthetic source of trouble, I condemned the vision to the realm of unimportant thoughts as another unavoidable manifestation of my overactive memory. I placed myself back together, walked Tommy out of my office, and made my way home. Later that day, my cousin Pavlo Ulyanov visited me. He had just returned from the Papuan rainforest of New Guinea. He had spent 7 months collecting the sounds and songs of the forest and its people. The tribesmen of that forest were some of the most isolated people in the world. As if on some other planet, the people were totally untouched by modernity. He described the people as deeply spiritual. Their ultimate spiritual outlet was a set of the most stunning songs of praise for Mother Nature. Though he had to work through a translator, he said that the simple songs of bounding joy reclaimed his heart into the eyes of God. Untainted by tradition, no appellation was needed to their sacred God. It was simple. Their existence was enough for them to celebrate, basking in the kind glow of life. He went on to play a couple recordings of chants and songs of the tribe. The song that took me most vigorously was the short hiking song of the tribesmen. He prefaced by saying, after fishing from the coast, if luck smiled upon them, the men would slowly amble back to their tribe. On their way back, they would harmoniously share in a hymn, a great chant of thanks. The recording rattled all my neural fibers and bindings loose. The liberated structures cavorted about in a glorious cerebral celebration. I didn't understand the short song, but the effortless harmony and deep connectivity of the message rang only truth into my heart. After a short recovery time, I asked Pavlo what it had meant. He roughly translated the song into a poem. It is us. It is us. For as long as we are here, we love you, are us. The one we thank you. The one we thank you. While with the tribe, he was taught how to make their drink from the rainforest tree Galbulimuma belgravina, the white magnolia. They showed him the benefits of drinking the tea they had made. The tea was a mixture of white magnolia and Hamalamina leaves. The translator, incomplete in his understanding, mistranslated the word for mind into health. So, as the tribesman handed him the drink and laughed, Pavlo and his translator wondered why they exuded such felicity in sharing the harsh tonic. Confused, Pavlo asked the tribesman for clarification. Pavlo chuckled and recited, and my translator kept telling me, it's good for the health. It's good for the health. And so, he had listened to the songs of the people while sipping the tea, its compounds saturating his soul with oneness. The key, he said, was the loss of human psychological separation. He continued in his explanation, adding, the ego, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, vanished. I was gifted with the most glorious invulnerability of oneness, the cessation of my isolation. Neither asleep nor awake, I was no longer only among the men and women around me. Their thoughts and desires all seemed to combine with the most distinguished crystallinity. I was them. It wasn't just the people. It was all of it. The soil, creatures, and trees, humming with the exalted energy of the earth, seemed to speak with me, or as me. It all wanted nothing but to share in the satisfaction of being. The sky and the sun were no longer substantial in exactness. Their power and brilliance became intangible. Like the numbers and symbols of some ancient lost civilization, no understanding was pressing me with urgency. I stayed in that state for hours on end with the people, chanting with the most entrancing consistency, lost in the depths of our connected souls. Eventually, I fell into deep rest. I was awoken at least 12 hours later, the root of some tree finally succeeding in provoking my discomfort and resurrecting my consciousness. It was at that moment that I noticed that Pavlo was crying. The most fragile tear had welled up and trailed down his face. The retardation of his cheek proved too much for his fine pearl of anima. He wiped the remnants away. He had brought back a research sample of the bark for the museum group with whom he was working. He had only used half of the contents, however. There was still a large fragment of bark left. He brought the bark to me, along with a Queen of Hearts houseplant. We suspiciously stared at each other for a moment. He broke the silence by gesturing to the bagged-up physic. The spoils of the researcher, he said gleefully. After Pavlo left me, I mixed, brewed, and indulged in the tea. The earthy taste had no remedy. The drowsy feeling was lovely though, throwing me into the silence of my room. After a while of sleepy sitting, mild hallucinations and bitter burping, I decided to go to sleep. Before drifting off, I thought, the song must have been a catalyst for the acceptance of connectivity. I played one of the recordings, but the sounds weren't powerful enough to kick the sleepiness. Later that same evening, I woke up suddenly. Unexplainably, Tommy was the solitary thought in my mind for some time. What has broken him? I pondered. What could have dealt such a devastating blow? My thoughts plagued me well into the morning hours, those hours of woe shepherding my leering eye into my own past. Those thoughts dueled for my attention for hours until I began to fall back to sleep. Just before I could fall peacefully, from my bookcase arose a dark figure. With the use of my T-blurred vision, I couldn't make out the figure. I felt its presence with everything in me. It further shook my senses as it came into focus. With my heart drumming, my thoughts caught up to me. It couldn't be, I told myself. In the subtle moonlight, the shimmer of scarred skin against his burnt black suit struck me. The lanky lurker looked down at me, his pained existence tenebrously looming. The dreamy distortion of time became my worst opponent. There was no limitation on the dilation of fear that ensued with each timeless moment. My bones ached with anticipation. After frightfully investigating the figure, no word spoken, no inquiry posted, I became sure of one thing. It was one of them, one of the three shadowy creatures from whom I had escaped whilst in Peru. It was the scarred beast, even taller in stature than our first meeting. In the absence of light, the PA on his lapel glowed dimly, as if recently removed from an inferno, smoldering with red-hot anger. He glared at me from a distance for some time. I prayed that it was some dream or deep sleep paralysis. All I could do was plead. "Why are you here? What have I done?" I begged. With no vocalization, he shared a message without a word spoken from his lips. "I am here in my truest form, eternally balanced and forever real. It is time. You have evaded the eventual for long enough. While you may have successfully shrouded your shame beneath many layers of reasoning, in the pursuit of tranquility in your heart, it will never be enough to escape it. Soon you will come to know and accept why you are here. It is time, no escape. You are tainted, your soul condemned by your past." His deafening voice, while perfectly silent, roared through my head like a migraine. Finally released from my frozen disposition, I begged, "Please leave me." My craven cries did not work. I felt him coursing through my veins, leaching into my bones, and cursing my essence. I ceased to act. The brute shifted timelessly towards me, grasping the tops of my hands. His hands were hot and rough, like embers. He peered into my eyes. Fear boiled up in another tempestuous surge, and the wave of terror washed over me with a drowning dose of chaos. As his deep eyes peered into mine, a vision of a young boy appeared. He was a lost boy floating as a coagulation of all young and healthy little boys. I didn't recognize him. It was almost as if the little boy was me. He had returned me to myself. I was forced to carefully examine his face. Its juvenile prowess and brimming potential was perfectly encapsulated by the beautiful innocence of his youth. His face quickly soured, beginning to cry with unending fear and pain, simultaneously aging backwards. The pain wasn't shown to me. Rather, I felt it with him. And then, I became the boy, feeling a numbing pain throughout my body, sending shivers down my lower back. The searing pressure ran up and down my spine like great pulses of hate. The pain, like cancer, spread parasitically through me. It was such an intense discomfort, deliriously deleterious. The dread and horror echoed within the darkness of the vision. After being thrashed around for some time, I felt something cold and firm grasp my head. The firm form strengthened its grip and pressurized my head. Its smooth form somehow felt like a ring of thorns being pressed into me. Growing without end, I screamed and shook, all futile. With one last cranial squeeze, I was shattered, and my body was reflected in pieces back at me. My anguish, from the timelessness of the experience, only expanded as the visions continued. I feared eternal expansion with no recession. My ballooning dread continued for what felt like hours in a steady repetition of my decimation and reconstitution. As the illusory visions of the chilling experience faded back into the face of the phantom man, I felt his lapel burning my shoulder with searing blatancy. The smell of burning skin filled my head. When the pain was through, I rolled over onto the floor, convulsing in disgust and fear as the evil objectifying, beastly metaman of my nightmare remained standing above me with a tyrannical smirk lining his chin. How could something so evil feel joy? I wondered. My tormentor said nothing, but his message was received. Damnation before salvation, he blasted into my mind. After I had given in, it all faded to black. It was the next afternoon when I woke up. Once again in my bed, I lay paralyzed. Nothing tangible was holding me there, but I feared that any abrupt movement would call forth the unknown in my room to damn me to its wrath once more. Bundling up my last threads of hope and bravery, I tried to clear my mind. I breathed deeply and slowly. After a long and dreadful time, I took a hold of my hope and it lifted me from my incapacitated mind. I rose and furiously scrambled for my journal. Immediately after retrieval, I wrote, "The worst vision of my fears has visited me. It took the deadliest of forms. Inescapable he was. He returned me to something. What? From what is my salvation? I am so scared, so alone. I was floating with someone. I was killing him and myself. It was so dark. The worst of it. It all felt more real than my life now." After the sleepiness had crawled from my mind, I set out for the beach, usually an undesirable place, sipping on the remaining tea and hoping for visionary answers to my torment. When I arrived and walked up to the water, the familiar sting of my aquaphobia missed me. I smiled and sat close to the water's transient edge. I needed to cleanse my mind from the fearful return of triumphant pain and anguish. It wasn't the unhinged spirit that belabored my mind. It was the memories, peeled away from their functional interlacement, that troubled me with such vigor. The mantra repetition therapy, isolated rumination, meditation, objectivity training, it all faded away. Like a lost child, faced with a tsunami, I was forced to bathe in my devastation. Staring at the perfect sunset, I conversed with myself as I lay on the beach. Maybe it was my father that impacted the disdainful decoration to my childhood, I hypothesized. The despair and alcoholic contempt for life was contagious, infecting all of us, trapped within the thin walls of my childhood. It was the devastation of unjust punishment and the unearned superiority of thought that chased me from the graces of love for him, and then for the world. I have been left with only the bad, only the dying remains of a once full man. Maybe back into this ideation set is what the spirit has forced me. I can't fathom why. Was it to add to the effectiveness of the trauma treatment of Tommy? Was it to add more connective memories so that I could fuse it all into a more effective objectivity training for Tommy? I meditated on my thoughts for a while, having already remembered the beatings and the love lost in my childhood. While the bountiful waves of the perfectly random universe crashed in front of me, I repeatedly attached the experience of the night before with possibilities, hoping for a clear answer. After the sunlight had faded into the sea, I fell asleep once more, sand creeping up my back. I had feared the water for so long, but that tonic granted me the power to sit close to the water, my feet dampened from the wetted sand. Though I was deeply transfixed by the potentialities I had consciously explored, a part of me knew that the truth was lurking well beneath my internal dialogue. It wasn't me in that forced vision, it was someone else. All of me knew it. The entrancing and rhythmic repetition of the waves turned into my personalized hymn, approximating the recordings that Pavlo had shown me. I fell into another tea-fueled slumber as the waves sang out with their sweet and sonorous swooshing. While sleeping, I had another vividly experiential dream. The new dream, however, was not made wretched by wave-stained souvenirs of reminiscence. I was boomed high above the sky, but not into the kingdom of God. It was so much more than that. The blank homogeneity of the pure white, espoused by the thoughtful imagery of religions, could not compare to the visions that blessed my consciousness in that dream. The vision was actually a fullness as a strangely perfect calm, a bright darkness cognized black, so clear and distinct in all its dense everything. It was not a visually obvious truth, but rather it was the warm embrace that I felt. Like each atom had aligned, finally resting from the frenzied dance into which they had been forced. It all welcomed me at once. I was free from my physiology, unmarked by pain or pleasure, only feeling at home, wrapped up in the energetic realm. I wanted that to be all of me, forever. Before long, my restful refuge ended. Feeling the same consistent pounding to which I had fallen victim the night before, this time upon my chest, I was surged suddenly, aggressively broken away from the super mega meta dream, as if hooked by a demon trying to pull me into the underworld, but stopping at the ineradicable reality of my physical form. I was forced back to life. I jolted back into my body and quickly realized the source of the pressurized and methodical emanation of pain. He was a stranger to me, a passerby who had found me. As I had more than slept, the rising tide had engulfed me and dragged my body into the calm shallows, the water washing intermittently to just above my nose. I had fallen so deeply into my tea-aided slumber, almost hoping it to be my last wakeful sleep, that nature had seemingly decided to reabsorb me. The water had taken over my essence, start drowning me, and my consciousness had refused to revive me. My heroic physical retrapper, that erroneous savior, he had dragged me back to land. When I arose and coughed out my salty transcendence, my dull stare was illuminated by aggravation and fear. My confusion and aquaphobia, miraculously dulled into less than a scream-filled mouth and fire-hive-riddled skin, only allowed for the stranger to briefly explain himself. My saving captor must have felt my animosity, remaining mostly speechless after his self-explanation, as absurd as it was necessary. Nonetheless, my anger was eventually lulled to rest by my grief, and I eased my cold stare. In our solemn silence, we stewed, the shared feeling that he had wasted his time in extending mine cutting us both deeply. To end out our encounter, I swallowed my emotions and thanked him. He paid me back in more than full, quietly whispering a plain, kind message. "You're welcome," he said softly. Only unspoken gloominess remained. As we dimly stared at one another, an understanding took a hold of both of us. We didn't bother with gratifying conversation. Disingenuous conceptions they would have been. The man, for whose name I did not ask, nor care to remember, soon drifted off into the misty dawn, as if traveling directly into memory. Soon enough, once again, an early thought shared by Tommy bounced around my head for a moment. His voice rang in my ears. "I took a walk," Tommy had said angrily, "in the moonlight the other night, through a large parking lot. It was so warm, almost the perfect temperature. There was not a soul afoot. Even the wind had taken leave. The lightest lunar lamplight lit the darkened lot. The stars dimly glowed through the moon's influence, and it was totally quiet. Nothing there to harm me or to create havoc. My mind, though, it took me. Suddenly, I was in my burial place. I was sure that my last breaths would be drawn there. Some evil was about to leap up and grab me. The night would synthesize an unbeatable demon to which I was to bear witness. It would compel me to die, and I would. The beating of my heart, the release of surely cuttingly crystallized norepinephrine, the sweat bulging from the palms of my hands, it was all coming to an end. I wasn't in control. I was under something else's. Anger surged through me, and I erupted in a passionate dance. It was a spiritual and tribal dance, allowing myself freedom from the forces that had controlled me. The freedom for which I had lusted came brimmingly in my allowance of the forces to take over my movements and work through me. I felt intense fear, but I began to revel in it. The night took me, and so I was at peace. This idea story perforated me as I sat, wet, beginning to feel more and more normally aquaphobic, fearful. A ship with no mast, I tried to properly relinquish my autonomy to the energy around me, letting go of what was lost already, just as Tommy had done. The energy was angry. I could taste it. It took my hand and buried it in the sand, pulling out a turquoise coquina clam. My fingers squeezed the clam, seeking explosion. I was repulsed at first by my actions, empathetic feelings for the barely animate creature overwhelming me. The energy around me eventually overcame my weakness and pressed on. No longer fighting myself, I squeezed it until my upper finger sounded off. Pop! The sound and pain from my damaged cartilage, paired with the explosive release of the unaffected creature from my fingers, pulled my mind back into control, and I regained my focus on fear. I sat on in hateful pain once more as the clam shuffled back underground. I took another long while to watch the sun rise, each of the particles of motion swirling around me, punctuated with the vitality of the world. I had seen the source, no need for explanation. It all seemed so clear to me. The universe had called to me. I was gifted a tantalizing taste of more, and then cast away from the dining more than room. I had to make a worthwhile time of my temporally distinctive body. It had been gifted so carefully. While entranced in the studious planning of my future, Tommy's name bounded across my mind. It all came to that young man. There was something drawing me to him. I would either be a moth to the flame or flower, destruction or delight. I stood up, dusted myself off, and walked away from my death's ephemeral esplanade. In my heart, I felt the weight of what had just happened. I knew my life had come back to me for a reason. It meant something in the place I had been. It was all necessary. My suffering, my upheaval, my longing, all of it made sense. I looked up and begged, "Why am I back here?" All I wanted was for the world to wrap me up again and accept me for who I had become, who I was. I was finally enough somewhere. Lost for words, I reminisced and continued walking. Transactional theory, simple, human, unpolishable, unpublishable. The requirement of consciousness in space and time is to be separated and linearly limited. Otherwise, how could we as one of ones experience space and time? This required restriction set gifts humanity with the challenge of always having the base final bioconscious action-cause-effect phenomenon as self-service. All of its uniqueness between realizing truemost love and constricting separative self-manifest popping with valiant violence. One can never make the finally potent endocrinological bump resultant for anyone else but themselves. Whether the motivation, decision matrix, or closed-to-inst response of some everything is created concurrently with any said to serve self or said to be for others, the first and last and always note of benefit is enough for the individual transacting. The consistent or inconsistent mediating self-service machine is so-called morality, whereby all may serve themselves least damagingly and most concurrently with others self-serving. These moral systems have to maximize, or at least better, the majority of self-servicing members for it to survive. Hence, the freedom requirement of any fine morality is so that it, as we may find a systematic equilibrium in truth. It requires individualized flexibility, just like price within a capitalistic system. If you cannot create and agree on the price of a leather belt, properly ensure the updatability and pliability of it as a market product, leap through the tall grass of leather pricing without the ubiquitous individual freedom to choose, then one can be sure that self-serving individuals cannot equalize at a single moral value without said same then some freedom. Any pride that one may pretend metaphysically labelable good for fitting into the box, well, that's as narrowly ridiculous as taking pride in your fat poison-sniffing snake for not eating a poisonous guinea pig. There just isn't anything to gain from it, intelligently, long-term thinkingly, least harmfully but still so self-servingly. Self-service may be organized and consistent and definitionally for others, but at the end of the transactional repeat day, it was the best decision for the individual. No matter the complexity or thought or morality said to be layered into any and all acts, a person simply always optimizes their self-service through their decision sets. The best and worst person ever defined are doing all their things for themselves directly, and this transactionality is not some sneaky trick or even perhaps known to most people. In fact, it is this knowing and the following, preceding, and always impossibility to act out a fully decent thing that drives the hyperconscious, the sociopaths, the psychopaths, the addicts, those sick on human life, repulsed and bored by their just being, to resent and reject life, humanity, and let me describe not further. For most, their transactionality is not a constant covert masterpiece-like manipulation monsoon, but rather a result of the simple setup of space-time consciousness requiring separation. By way greatest of abstraction chains or divinely constructed creative endeavors, this non-absolvable limit cannot be defeated. We are all apart by definition. Holding no water is the very idea of self-sacrifice, for that sacrifice, at motivationally best, helped the sacrificee to feel as though his life was worth it, and as though he was meaningful, and as though he would be remembered, and as though his genuine self-sacrifice for his people was to please something more than himself. The fantastic feeling of the self rewarding itself for thinking its final transaction was not his isolated, selfish by design mind. Even the greatest of Christ was surely, as separate God or man, thinking that his people were better off, making him the final transactional node smile. Now, the greatest motivated evil very easily breaks my theory over its knee by ways evildoers. They take revenge for being as said ultimately separate and must be resentful towards hence truly something realer truer unified, causing their feel knowing most into judgment by disparity of heart and actions, frustration at just being separate but feeling everything, to actually be motivated to fight, thus proving the something intangibly greater is most real. So, I will not mention that here. The ultimate morality is thus one where the greatest number of transactions are mediated by the most similar framework, say by religion, culture, temperamental averages, IQ norms, etc. A moral system's intensity stage of development, level of egalitarian outcome, namely, its success is defined by its level of short into long-term self-serving decisiveness organized and channel-mediated by all cultural, civilizational, doctrinal translational consensuses. The ultimate actuality of any morality is determined by its demographic base's ability to think enough to short into long-term self-serve transform, for, as mentioned, any actual moral system is crafted only in freedom. Therefore, the resultant and causing freedom interaction collective may only be as complex as the individuals, for the sum of the complexity of each person's freely chosen long or short-term decisiveness fractally makes a longer or shorter self-serving system. To test this theorization, we may demographically test correlate morality and level of development, IQ and morality, and then IQ and level of development to show that it's all the same deal, self-serving beings and their levels of refined, optimized for the longer term, utilized cognized freedom. And now we see the unavoidability and dynamic limitation levels, unmeshability, and the violence of multiculturalism and racism and ethnocentrism and IQ prejudice, and all our fun little chimp games as clear as day, and currently insolubly why. It is simple. If one man knows that he will starve if he eats all the tuna on Monday, and another cannot cognize this naturally, then the mediating of their self-service can never align naturally. Hence then comes order and hierarchy and learning and kindness and all the human tries before failing into war, or by Tuesday, they both starve. For rape or for courting, for admiration or for hate, for someone else or for the more obvious self to be any less contained finally within a self-consciousness, it requires neural manipulation of subjective start-end point, a depth dynamic of revelation of how enact ion can aid you and at what level. The war of this learned and realized and understood malleable self into more but true biobase is the literature, music, art, the vicarious wisdom written, and so with extremes corrected by the mess titled reality. All the incompleteness of the judgmental superciliousness but simplicity is smoothed into a reasonably successful pathway. Again, most requiring freedom, forwards into heaven on earth, realized more and more totally that the truer truth is that consciousness itself overcomes animalistic servicing of self. Incompleteness of comprehension still lingers here called love, a word translate limiting so much more than more, its light muting all this practicality and reason, all this doubting of even these words explaining its muting. all the morality in the world or rebellion against this form disguised as evil self-service but for all accepted or against rebelled, cannot deny the worthiness of this creation, this form of consciousness, the spatial temporal human being. Do you still see the seemingly totalizing but somehow sociably incomplete truth of this description? The human problem, definitively distinct, the human solution, human lives, some human lives as history and hopefully fuller ascension coming, somehow trying to overcome the limitation. T-theory cuts like a fifth-dimensional blade through time to get to, like many smart C-suites and Nietzschean pursuing truthers must know, what is the end transactional gain grouping for the self-servers named you and me? From pious to pompous to vile, each and all the same in final transaction self-service. So, you go now and know we are filthy animals knowing better we all, you go now knowing and just try to make a single soapbox atop standable. I dare you to go and attempt to feel truly superior, truthful and tri-superior. Ha, no, cry and fight upwards my lovely friends. Perhaps we know love insofar as we have the ability to realize, recognize, and further transact with the revelatory knowledge shown by proxy-proof instantiations that the separation limitation of this life is just a necessary limiting factor of this realm. Somehow, we know proxy-realized by what the word love approximates, that this self and its reverberations are not our full conscious being, that each and every one of us is fighting against and nearing the edge of transactionality itself. Blood sun fighting, blood sun holding.